This is BBC World News Today. I'm Rajini Vaidyanathan. Our top stories. Round 2 of the formal Brexit talks get underway. It's time to get down to business, say officials, as they try to hammer out some of the key details over Britain's departure from the EU. After North Korea's intercontinental ballistic missile test, the South Office talks. But how will the invitation go down in Washington? And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge become the latest high-profile visitors to touch down in Poland. The first stop in their diplomacy tour with the family in tow. Hello and welcome to World News Today. Britain's Brexit Minister David Davis has pledged to get down to business as the second round of formal talks on the UK's departure from the European Union gets underway. In a brief appearance alongside EU Chief Negotiator Michael Barnier, Mr Davis said there'd been a good start to the process. Mr Barnier described the atmospherics as good and said talks would now delve into the heart of the matter. This week's discussions will mainly revolve around 3 issues. The Irish border, that's the frontier between Northern Ireland, a part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, an EU member state. And the size of any so-called divorce bill, which is the financial commitment Britain made as a member and has to honour before leaving. And citizens' rights. What will happen to millions of EU citizens living in the UK and about 1 million UK expats in other EU countries? Well, after a year since Britain narrowly voted to leave the EU, the UK government seems at war with itself over Brexit, with leaks over the weekend suggesting the cabinet's extremely divided over the divorce terms. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg has the latest.
They don't really have much time to hang around. The two men who'll haggle over how we leave, especially with the UK's political situation. Rather fluid at best.
It's incredibly important we now make good progress, that we negotiate through this and identify the differences so that we can deal with them and identify the similarities so that we can reinforce them. Now it's time to get down to work and make this a successful negotiation.
Now we have to work.
Thank you. Work. Yes, that's right, work.
There is a lot to do. Working out the Irish border, the Brexit bill, rights for Brits abroad. But government ministers don't agree completely over what should be on the table. Perhaps that's why the Brexit secretary seemed to arrive without his notes. Perhaps because chatter around the cabinet at home suggests the big beasts are split.
Is the cabinet split on Brexit?
You've seen and of course, in another part of town today, I'm very pleased that negotiations are beginning, and as you know, a very fair, serious offer has been put on the table by the UK government.
It's not just that government has to wrangle Brexit through Brussels and Parliament, but deal with other pressures and disagreements on public sector pay, on spending. Above all, the disagreements have emerged into daylight because the discipline Theresa May had imposed on the Tories has all but disappeared since the general election. Tomorrow she'll warn the cabinet to behave, to keep their views to themselves. But those with desire for the top job or helpful friends with ambition believe the game is on.
It's got to stop. I think whoever's doing it, everyone needs to get into a cold bath or cold shower and then get together and have a warm pint afterwards, because this is damaging. It's damaging to the party, it's damaging to the parliamentary MPs and, most important, to the country.
Remember him urging the Tories today to inspire, not to look to the past. The risk for the Tories, the current generation hurts each other, fighting old battles anew. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Now from the UK to the US, where it's Made in America week at the White House. There'll be a show of goods on the South Lawn as President Trump promotes US manufacturing. But when it comes to legislation, there are fears that the Senate's healthcare bill may be stalled after Senator John McCain underwent surgery and is out for at least a week. And the President once again tweeted his support for his son Donald Jr., who met with a Russian lawyer during the election campaign. Well, here to help us through it all is the BBC's Anthony Zerker. Anthony, the White House is trying to shift the focus back to the economy, but bringing jobs and manufacturing back to the US is easier said than done.
Absolutely. Happy Made in America Week to you, Rajini. There's a running theme over the course of this year, the Trump administration so far, of trying to have these weeks that focus on, as you mentioned, infrastructure, jobs, spending on construction and importation. It's almost become a running joke, however, because these weeks tend to get sidetracked by Donald Trump's own statements and tweets. He was tweeting about a women's golf tournament over much of the weekend, and that infrastructure week I mentioned, that was sidetracked by James Comey's testimony. Everyone was making jokes about infrastructure week because no one really mentioned anything about it at the time, and no one has talked about it since. So yes, there are lorries and fire trucks and construction equipment all scattered over the south lawn of the White House, but we'll see if it has any kind of staying power, if it can break through the messages that Trump's trying to get out.
And let's go back to some of the key business that he wants to get done before the summer is out. One of those, namely, being healthcare reform. A bit of a stumbling block this week with news that Senator John McCain is now recovering from surgery.
John McCain was a reliable vote, thought to be a reliable vote for health care reform. With him out of the picture, it shows just how narrow the margins are for Republicans in the Senate. If they lose one reliable vote, they may not be able to pass the bill. Plus, we had word that the Congressional Budget Office scoring of the impact on unemployed or uninsured people may not come out this week either. There are a lot of delays, and the Republicans are running out of time. They extended their stay here in Washington for a couple of weeks into August, but they may not be able to get to it even then.
You mentioned the president's tweets and tweeting about a golfer, but he's also reiterated his support for his son, Donald Jr. Last week, you could have said, was Russian email week. What more can we expect on that this week, perhaps?
Well, it's a steady drip of new revelations. There are a lot of questions coming out of this meeting. We're finding about new people who had attended, a Russian-American lobbyist. He told the Associated Press just yesterday that apparently documents were handed over that detailed some possible ties between the Democrats and Russia, something that Donald Trump Jr. said never happened, that they didn't really discuss it in the meeting. So it seems like every news story that comes out, there's a new revelation and a new reason for the Trump administration to get on the defensive.
And certainly many Trump voters that I've spoken to say that they don't mind about the Russia thing because they think a lot of it is made up by the media. Certainly the president's approval ratings came out, the latest figures at the weekend. They weren't too good for him, though, were they, Anthony?
No, they weren't. They showed a record low in this poll for his administration. He was down to 36%, which is quite lower than Barack Obama or George W. Bush at the same point in their administrations. I mean, there's some interesting takeaways. The Republican support for Donald Trump is still pretty high, 80%. That's only a 2 or 3 percentage point drop. It's Democrats and independents that are becoming very strongly opposed to him. That may undermine Republicans trying to run for re-election next year, but that's still a long way off. And Democrats, that same poll showed that a majority of Americans think Democrats, they only stand for anti-Trump. They don't stand for anything on their own. That's a concern for Democrats going forward. They need to find their own identity, their own issue to campaign on. They can't just be the anti-Donald Trump party.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Anthony Zerka in Washington, for the latest in US politics. Well, among President Trump's promises on the campaign trail was an immigration crackdown with a pledge to deport criminals first. So far, arrests have risen, but actual deportations haven't. But a special report by the BBC's Panorama programme reveals that thousands of undocumented immigrants with no criminal records are also being caught in these sweeps, with families split apart in the process. Hilary Anderson sent us this report.
These are the Duarte children. One morning in May, when they were getting ready for school in their home in San Diego, California, Border Patrol officers came and arrested both of their parents.
They just came up to my mom and they told her that she was arrested. And then they put handcuffs on her. Most of all, we were just shocked. And we all just sat down, we just cried.
Their parents, Rosenda and Francisco Duarte Sr., have been living in America illegally for 21 years. Border Patrol initially suspected them of involvement in international human trafficking, but later dropped the accusation. The Duarte parents run a small ice cream business and have no criminal record. The first night alone, the children all moved their beds into the same room for comfort. Francisco, the older brother, now does his best to run the household. The border guards knew they were leaving a teenager in charge of children.
They just asked me, "Are you Francisco?" And I was like, "Yeah." It's like, "You're 19 years old." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Okay, and you can take care of things." I was like, "All right."
So they just left you here with the whole family?
Yeah.
President Trump came to office on a promise to prioritize criminals for deportation.
We have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
In his first 100 days, 41,000 illegals or suspected illegals were arrested. Most were criminals, but there was a massive spike in people like the Duartes being arrested, non-criminals who were undocumented. President Trump's supporters say the administration is rightly enforcing the law.
Nobody wants families split. And the way to ensure that, if you're a family, is to not to come to this country illegally. Sometimes the sins of the father are visited upon the sons, and that's unfortunate, but the government didn't create those sins.
The Duartes went to see their parents in the immigrant detention center where they've been held. Their mother has since been released on bail, but both parents still face possible deportation, as now do any of America's 11 million undocumented immigrants. Hilary Anderson, BBC News.
Today, the Washington Post reported that the United Arab Emirates hacked into Qatari government news websites and social media, posting inflammatory false quotes attributed to the Emir of Qatar. Those reports then sparked the ongoing upheaval between Qatar and its neighbours, which led to the cutting of diplomatic ties. The UAE Minister State for Foreign Affairs, Anwar bin Mohammed Gargash, spoke to the BBC's Lucy Hawkins earlier today, and he issued this denial of that report.
This is a crisis. Every day there is a new allegation. There was an allegation about us asking for the withdrawal of Qatar from hosting the World Cup. Today it's this one, completely untrue.
There are quite specific allegations there from US intelligence. Are you saying you do not?
No, as it said, unidentified also.
Okay, well, the Washington Post is quoting US intelligence sources. Yeah. Do you believe there was a hack? Do you believe Qatar's ruler made these diplomatically sensitive remarks?
I just want to say that the Post story is completely untrue. I haven't read the story yet. I've seen the reports on it, but it's completely untrue.
It says that your country hacked Qatar's news websites.
Completely untrue.
And posted comments that said that Qatar's ruler praises Iran and praises Hamas.
Completely untrue.
Do you think that he would have said those comments, though? Well, very diplomatically sensitive comments.
I think it's, if you look at the comments, they're very consistent with what they've been doing. I'm talking about the hack, completely untrue.
Okay, they also say that on the 23rd of May, senior members of your government discussed the plan and its implementation.
Completely untrue.
And then on the 24th, the hacking took place.
Again, the whole story is completely untrue.
Now, for the first time in nearly 2 years, South Korea's proposed military talks with the North. The proposal comes in spite of the test earlier this month of what many experts say was Pyongyang's first intercontinental ballistic missile. President Moon Jae-in, who took over leadership of the South in May, has said he wants to see closer engagement with the North to de-escalate what he describes as a very dangerous situation. But how will that sit with the US and regional allies? Well, we're joined from Washington now by Balbina Huang, who formerly served in the State Department and is now at Georgetown University. Balbina Huang, is engagement the right way to handle the North Korean situation?
Well, I don't think only engagement. I think it's got to be engagement along with all other types of efforts, including upping some of the pressure against some of these activities, outrageous activities that North Korea conducts. And that is essentially exactly what President Moon Jae-in has said will be his policy.
And how do you think other people, countries like the United States, who've been promising a tougher stance over North Korea's nuclear tests, how will they take this?
Well, the Trump administration has certainly declared that it will pursue a tougher stance, but it has also made very clear that it is, in fact, also interested in types of engagement, including diplomatic and political engagement. So I believe that there is full support from the United States, and I would hope that the coordination between the two allies is very close.
And what about other players in the region?
I think also, certainly this is in line with what China has at least claimed that it has wanted for the last several decades. And I don't think anybody else would oppose this approach, not even Japan. And I think Prime Minister Abe also understands that there has to be some sort of engagement along with continued pressure, to stop North Korea's illicit activities.
So this is the intention to hold these talks, but what is the likelihood of this actually happening?
Well, that is exactly the problem. I think there's been so much debate about whether engagement or not engagement and whether one is better than the other. I think, frankly, that we have moved beyond this debate about engagement itself. The point about engagement is it only works if both sides of the party are willing to participate. And the problem with engagement is not the engagement itself, but that North Korea has consistently refused for the last 6 years to engage. So we'll have to see if North Korea will respond to President Moon's approaches.
And Balbina, does this in some way, this gesture from South Korea effectively legitimize North Korea's actions at the moment? Some would say that.
No, I don't. Well, I suppose there are some that would argue that, but I think we've moved beyond that point. What I particularly do like about this most recent proposal from President Moon is that he's talking about military engagements. And I think that's actually critical. Some of the broad gestures he has mentioned is restarting the Kaesong project, which is a co-economic development project, tour groups, reunion groups, and so on. To me, those are simply gestures which I'm not so certain would get North Korea to actually take action. It's really military action, and I think military talks are crucial if North Korea is willing to participate.
Well, Balbina Huang, thanks very much for joining us, and we will see if those talks do indeed happen. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news. The United Nations says the number of civilian casualties in Afghanistan has reached a record high in the first half of 2017. In a new report, the UN said more than 1,600 people were killed from January to the end of June, an increase of 2% from the same period last year. The majority of the victims died in attacks by the Taliban and the Islamic State group. 2 bomb blasts have killed at least 9 people in the city of Maiduguri in northeast Nigeria. A female suicide bomber blew herself up at a mosque, killing 8 people during morning prayers. In another incident, the police say Boko Haram insurgents forcefully strapped explosives to a 10-year-old boy who they found herding cattle. The boy was killed. Relatives of the most Dutch passengers of the Malaysia Airlines flight shot down over Ukraine have gathered for a ceremony in the Netherlands to dedicate a memorial to the victims. The memorial site's close to Schiphol Airport, where flight MH17 left on its last journey 3 years ago. Investigators say the rocket that brought down the plane was fired from territory controlled by Russian-backed rebels. A terminally ill man has begun a legal challenge against the ban on assisted dying in England and Wales. 67-year-old Noel Conway has motor neurone disease. He says he fears becoming entombed in his body and wants to be able to choose when and where he dies without those who aid him being prosecuted. Currently, it's illegal to help someone to die. Our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh reports.
Should there be a right to die? It's an issue which polarises opinion and keeps coming back to the High Court. The latest challenge comes from Noel Conway from Shropshire, who was too weak to attend today's hearing. His wife Carol is his main carer. Motor neurone disease means he increasingly relies on a ventilator. Once fit and active, his muscles are progressively wasting. He fears how he will die and wants a doctor to be allowed to give him a lethal dose of drugs.
I want to be able to say goodbye to the people that I love at the right time. Not to be in a zombie-like condition, suffering both physically and psychologically. That, to me, would be a living hell.
It is only 3 years since the Supreme Court rejected a similar plea for a right to die from Tony Nicholson, though he was not considered to be terminally ill.
The blanket ban on assisted dying has been challenged many times, and in every case, the courts have rejected the central argument that the current law breaches human rights by preventing people from having a dignified death. Mr. Conway's lawyers argue that his challenge is different, as it applies to a narrow group of people, those who are terminally ill with less than 6 months to live and who have a settled wish to die.
But those safeguards have already failed to persuade Parliament. It's only 2 years since MPs overwhelmingly rejected proposals to allow assisted dying. Baroness Jane Campbell a disability rights campaigner, says changing the law would send all the wrong signals and have horrific ramifications.
This case must not become law because it will burden disabled people across the country who will not feel safe without the protection of a law that says it is wrong to assist somebody to die.
Noel Conway's health is faltering and he knows he may die before his case is settled. The High Court will reserve its judgment until October and it may then go all the way to the Supreme Court. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have arrived in Warsaw for the first part of an official visit to both Poland and Germany in the wake of Brexit. Along with them are their 3-year-old son George and 2-year-old daughter Charlotte. From Warsaw, our royal correspondent Peter Hunt sent this report.
At 3, he's far too young to know if he's a reluctant royal. But Prince George definitely wasn't keen to embrace Warsaw without his father's helping hand. One future king did persuade another one to follow in his footsteps. On the tarmac, George struck a nonchalant pose and practiced the odd ballet move. A fidgeting toddler with a lifetime under an intense spotlight ahead of him. Princess Charlotte's freedom of movement was constrained by being in her mother's arms. The language divide isn't the only challenge. Here, a country that relatively recently embraced the EU is welcoming royals from one on the way out of the institution.
It's Union Jack. It's called Union Jack.
The nitty-gritty of Brexit won't feature here. Rather, William and Kate are in Warsaw to remind people of the depth of past links and the potential for future ones between the UK and Poland.
Warsaw's past on display on a memorial wall to those murdered when, during the Second World War, the Poles tried and failed to end German occupation.
So you wore this all the time during the uprising?
Yes.
Marzena Szejbal, aged 20, joined the Warsaw Uprising. Now 92, she said they had to fight for independence.
We couldn't stand any longer those behaving of Germany. 5 years, it was impossible.
The spoken-for royal with an admirer in the crowd. A crowd like others elsewhere, curious to see the future of the British monarchy. Peter Hunt, BBC News, Warsaw.
And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge will head to Germany for the next leg of that tour. Now, more than 60 years ago, a feisty little girl named Eloise took New York by storm. Her adventures in the Plaza Hotel entertained many who read the books and got lost in her world. And now an exhibition in Manhattan is celebrating the book that Kay Thompson and Hilary Knight created. It's appropriately named Eloise at the Museum, and we've gone to take a look.
She gets in trouble. She is a free spirit. And everybody wanted to be Eloise. Eloise landed with a skibble and a squeak at the Plaza Hotel in 1955 in New York. She was a 6-year-old girl, no parents, no siblings, just nanny, living in luxury in this splendid hotel, and America fell in love with her. I think the secret of Eloise's charm and allure is twofold. One, it's that voice, that funny voice that Kay Thompson came up with. The other part is Hilary Knight's drawings, which are full of marvelous detail and rhythm and gesture and line. When a child reads a picture book, he enters into the book. And that was what I was trying to accomplish in the gallery here. You enter the plaza, you see the house phones, and you can pick up a house phone and hear Bernadette Peters reading the 4 books out loud. You see Eloise in Paris, you see Eloise at Christmas time, and you see a beautiful suite of finished drawings from Eloise in Moscow, which was published in 1959 and was the last book in the original series. In the middle of the Cold War, Kay and Hilary went to the Soviet Union. It's like Kay's prank phone call to the Soviets. She is spoofing the harshness of the Soviet regime by contrasting it with this little girl from the decadent West, this rich young thing who arrives in a Rolls Royce. To be a really successful picture book, you have to do three things. You have to have an amazing heroine or hero. You have to evoke a wonderful spot, like the plaza, and you have to last through several generations. And Eloise has done all three of those things. She is one for the ages.
And the adventures of Eloise end our programme here, and her stories have spanned generations. Now don't forget, you can get in touch with me and most of the team on Twitter. My handle is @BBC Rajini V. Thanks so much for watching us. Please stay with us on BBC World News.
Hello there. We'll start with a look at the big picture across Europe as you go through Monday night on into a Tuesday. We've got low pressure across Scandinavia. That's bringing a bit of a breeze with it and some outbreaks of rain. High pressure through the central swathe, but not immune from some showers developing, particularly